No one paid much attention to the woman beneath the aircraft, just another civilian contractor in oil-stained coveralls, tightening bolts no one else wanted to touch. Her name tag read Warren E., but most on base simply called her the quiet one. Elise Warren never raised her voice, never missed a shift, never left a job half done. That morning, she was working on the F-16's hydraulic system in Hangar 3 when General Granger arrived unannounced. He scanned the room like a wolf among sheep. His eyes landed on her. "You!" he barked. "Do you even know what it means to serve?" She said nothing, just stood up slowly, wiping grease from her fingers. As she turned, her shirt lifted slightly just enough to expose a faint, brutal scar etched along her spine. Numbers. Coordinates. Granger laughed, but the young lieutenant beside him didn't. And 5 minutes later, the entire hangar was on lockdown. This isn't just a story about a mechanic, it's about a ghost the military tried to forget. Stick with us to the end, you'll understand why silence can be louder than metals. If stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Would you stay silent if the world forgot what you gave? Let's find out what Elise Warren is really made of. Elise Warren lived 23 minutes off base in a dented Airstream trailer parked against the edge of a dying desert town. Her neighbors were silence, heat, and the occasional coyote slinking past the chain-link fence. The trailer was small, sun-bleached, and immaculately ordered. A single toothbrush, one plate, tools aligned with the kind of precision that only comes from years of knowing chaos firsthand. She woke each morning at 3:45, before the desert light had even thought about returning. Push-ups on cold linoleum. A shower that hissed like a snake through corroded pipes. Black coffee brewed strong enough to melt resolve. She read weather reports from 3 sources. Watched for winds she couldn't see. Took notes no one asked her to take. By 5:00, Elise was on base. The mechanics didn't know much about her, just that she was always first in, last out, that she never complained, never bragged, and never joined in on weekend barbecues. She didn't talk about where she'd worked before, and no one ever saw her smile for longer than a second. But when a hydraulic line groaned under pressure, when a system failed inspection for reasons no one could find, they called for her. "Elise hears the leak before the sensors do," one tech joked once. "She doesn't hear it," Maria Gonzalez replied, more serious. "She feels it." They called her the hydraulic whisperer, and yet Elise never claimed mastery. She simply listened, tilted her head against panels, ran her fingers along rivets like she was reading Braille. She treated every aircraft like it was going to war tomorrow, and someone she loved was inside. She worked like she was being watched, though no one ever was. She logged more hours than she needed, double-checked others' repairs without ever saying she had. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice carried weight. Calm, low, almost too steady. Some of the younger mechanics asked her how she knew so much. "Here and there," she'd say with a shrug, "you pick things up." Once, a tech caught her mumbling under her breath, in a language no one recognized. Not Spanish, not Arabic, something harder, more guttural. When asked about it, she just blinked. "Old habit," she said, and left it there. Her sleeves were always rolled down, even in the summer. But sometimes, in the heat of the hangar, they slid up, revealing faint white lines along her forearms. Scars. Not random. Parallel. Clean. Like they'd been erased, then covered again. Maria noticed them first. She didn't ask. Because Elise didn't invite questions. She invited trust, the way a minefield invites caution. And still, no one suspected. Not yet. Not the ones who worked beside her. Not the ones who dismissed her as just a mechanic. And certainly not the general who would, within the next hour, regret ever opening his mouth. General Thomas Granger wasn't the type to knock. He entered Hangar 3 like he owned the oxygen. Boots polished to a blinding gloss, jaw set like carved marble. A man built from doctrine, promotion boards, and perfectly delivered speeches about sacrifice. Everyone straightened. Even the civilians. Even Elise. The hangar's ambient hum dulled as he stepped through the crew, trailed by a knot of junior officers trying to look important. His gaze was clinical, predatory. He scanned the maintenance logs without reading them, ran a gloved finger across a workbench, and frowned at the grease stain it picked up less for the dirt, more for the performance of disapproval. Then he saw her. Elise was under the nose of an F-16, arms deep in the hydraulic reservoir, sleeves pushed up just far enough to expose a faint white scar across her forearm. She hadn't seen him yet. "You," he barked, loud enough to echo. She didn't flinch. Elise slid the wrench from the line, wiped it once on a rag, and crawled out from under the aircraft in one fluid motion. Calm. Mechanical. Like she'd done this 1,000 times. Granger's voice dripped with something between amusement and disdain. "Tell me, mechanic, do you even know what it means to serve?" There it was. The insult tucked inside a question, delivered with that smug cadence of someone who'd never been challenged in his own domain. Elise stood quietly, rag still in hand, grease smudged on her jaw. She didn't respond. Not because she didn't hear him, but because it didn't warrant a reply. The silence dragged. Around them, mechanics froze mid-movement, unsure whether to intervene or vanish. Granger stepped closer. "I asked you a question, Miss Warren." She met his gaze at last. Her eyes weren't defiant. They were distant, measured, like someone looking through a window into another time. Granger smirked. "I suppose they didn't teach you military courtesy at whatever trade school you crawled out of. Or perhaps," he turned slightly to his entourage for effect, "this is what happens when we let quotas fill critical positions." Lieutenant Jensen winced but said nothing. Others looked away. Still, Elise didn't speak. She merely blinked once, then bent down, picked up a pressure gauge, and returned to her task. "Dismissed." Granger's nostrils flared. "Excuse me?" he snapped. But Elise was already kneeling, reconnecting a feed line, as if the general's voice was just part of the hangar's background noise. The moment cracked. One of the younger mechanics, Tommy Chen, shifted uneasily. "Sir," he offered, "Warren's the senior on this aircraft. We usually—" "I wasn't speaking to you, Airman," Granger snapped. Then louder, directed at Elise. "Get up. Face the room. Enlighten us. What exactly qualifies you to work on a multi-million-dollar defense asset? Or did you earn this position on your knees?" The silence after that was different. Heavier, acidic. A pause bloomed. Elise stood up slowly. Her voice when it came was calm, even, controlled. "I fix what matters, sir." And with that, she turned, unaware, perhaps all too aware that as she moved, her shirt rode up just slightly. And someone behind Granger leaned forward, eyes locked on the carved numbers along her spine. Lieutenant Mason Wright didn't mean to stare. But when Elise Warren turned to grab a diagnostic reader, her shirt caught slightly against the edge of the aircraft panel. Just enough. Just long enough. And there they were. Numbers. Etched not in ink, but in scarred, tissueized, faded, and deliberate. A single vertical line down the center of her spine, like a scar that had been recut again and again to keep it visible. Beneath it, two separate strings of digits. Latitude. Longitude. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until his chest ached. Mason was young, but not clueless. His father had served 26 years in intelligence command. Mason had grown up hearing bedtime stories about operations that didn't exist, places wiped from maps, soldiers who came back with new names and empty eyes. And he'd heard of this. Not the woman. The numbers. One night, years ago, his father had come home drunker than usual and whispered, "Some operatives don't carry their extraction points on paper. They carry them in flesh." Just in case words are no longer an option. He hadn't believed it. Until now. Granger, still basking in the sound of his own ego, didn't notice the shift in Mason's expression or the way the young lieutenant subtly stepped back and pulled out his phone behind his leg. No photos. Just a quick browser query, numbers entered, coordinates pulled. 33.36 degrees, 69.1, 8 degrees. His stomach dropped. Nuristan Province, Afghanistan. Redacted files. Lost platoons. One name. Project Quiet Ember. A mission labeled unsuccessful, no survivors, a disaster, a ghost. And yet here she was, wiping grease from her hands like nothing had changed. Mason took a step back, then another. He whispered something to the junior officer beside him. Something urgent, something that made the young man stiffen and nod. Then Mason slipped from the hangar without ceremony. Granger didn't notice. He was still circling Elise, enjoying the performance. You think silence makes you strong, he barked? That if you just keep your head down, we won't see the cracks? Elise didn't answer. She was holding a torque wrench in one hand, fingers wrapped tightly, knuckles white. Her breath had slowed. 4 counts in, 7 hold, 8 out. The same rhythm she used during dust storms. The same rhythm she'd once used to survive 29 days underground. From across the room, Maria Gonzalez saw her face shift, not in fear, not in anger, but in memory. Her eyes weren't looking at Granger anymore. They were seeing something far older, far bloodier. And for the first time since she joined this base, Maria felt something like unease bloom in her chest. Because Elise Warren was no longer just a quiet woman who fixed jets. She was something else entirely. A weapon that had once been buried. And now accidentally, irrevocably uncovered. Later, they would all say the signs had been there. Maria Gonzalez, the most senior mechanic aside from Elise, would remember the way Elise always checked the emergency exits in any room she entered. Never obvious, never paranoid, just present. She'd sweep the corners of her room with her eyes, clock the fire extinguisher, the distance to the door, the angle of cover, every time. Tommy Chen once dropped a heavy spanner behind her just once and swore he saw Elise flinch before the tool hit the ground. But at the time, they all chalked it up to eccentricity. Old habits from a rougher life. Some people were just built tightly wound. No one thought to ask wound by what. She never joined base picnics, politely declined every group photo, didn't keep decorations at her station, just tools, stacked in silent order. And one mug chipped on the rim, standard issue army green, initials long faded. She never explained where it came from. Most assumed she was prior service, maybe medical discharge, something unspoken but ordinary. But those who worked closest to her started noticing small anomalies. Her language skills, for one. Maria once overheard her speaking rapid-fire Dari to a contractor from the Afghan maintenance crew. Not conversationally, operationally. Short commands, battlefield dialect, things no civilian would know unless they'd been there. Tommy swore he saw a Russian manual open at her desk once. Later that week, an Arabic one. Next week, Korean. When asked, Elise just smiled faintly. I read to stay sharp. The base medic, Collins, once treated her for a laceration, said her pain tolerance was off. When he stitched the gash, she didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Just watched him with the quiet attentiveness of someone evaluating a procedure, not receiving care. You been through worse? He'd asked lightly. Elise had tilted her head, as if calculating whether the truth mattered. Something like that, she said, and nothing more. There were her scars, of course what little they could see. Her forearms bore parallel white lines, like the shadows of something surgically removed. Maria, who dated a Navy SEAL once, recognized professional tattoo removal when she saw it. But even that wasn't what stuck with people. It was her stillness. The kind that didn't come from calm, but from discipline. As if her body had once learned to wait out bombings, interrogations, betrayal. As if she'd once held her breath not to survive, but to ensure someone else could. Then there was her back. Only a few ever saw it. In the heat of summer, she sometimes tied her coveralls around her waist, working in just a dark sports bra. The hangar was hot. No one cared. Until they saw the numbers. Scarred deep into the skin along her spine. Surgical, deliberate. The scars weren't angry, they were functional. Coordinates, clearly. But so embedded into her flesh that even time hadn't erased them. Gonzalez had asked her once, casually, half joking, industrial accident? Elise had looked at her, eyes steady. Something like that. Then she applied a strange ointment, a thick salve, with no label directly over the scars, pressing carefully, preserving them. Not healing. Preserving. Some reminders, she murmured to no one in particular, should hurt. Maria never brought it up again. None of them did. Because there was something sacred about the way Elise carried herself. Not arrogant, not even proud, just final. As if her past had already claimed its space and didn't need to be retold. The truth? They all saw the signs. They just didn't understand what they were looking at. Until the general tried to break her. Until the scars looked back. Until a phone call triggered lockdown. And by then, it was too late. The ghost had already stirred. The first time Elise Warren heard the phrase ghost protocol, it was whispered across a steel table in a room with no clocks. Her name then wasn't Elise. It was Captain Eva Warren, Tactical Intelligence, Tier 1 Embedded Ops. The man across from her had no insignia, no folder, just a voice like static and a gaze that didn't blink. "This mission doesn't end with extraction," he said. "It ends with erasure." She didn't flinch. He pushed a single piece of paper across the table. No briefing packet, just a string of numbers. Coordinates. "They won't be written down again," he said. "You'll carry them." Elise memorized them in less than a minute. Not because she was ordered to, because she understood what they meant. A point on Earth where a secret could end, or begin again. Afghanistan, winter 2010, Nuristan province. The operation was called Quiet Ember, a misdirection buried inside a myth. Intelligence indicated a potential coordinated strike against 4 American bases, with a common origin point. A single village deep in Taliban, held mountains, unreachable by drone, invisible to satellite. Warren was chosen not because she was expendable, but because she wasn't. She could disappear in plain sight, create trust, feed disinformation, infiltrate without backup, and if captured, resist. She spent 9 months building her cover. A disgraced ex-UN translator turned weapons smuggler. Her accent was perfect, her lies airtight. She brokered false trades, sold faulty coordinates, allowed low-value U.S. convoys to be intercepted to gain credibility. Every loss calculated, every step bringing her closer to the central cell. Then came the children. 3 of them boys, no older than 10, slated to die in a planned explosion for propaganda footage. American drones had marked the building. Her handler's voice crackled through the comm. "Maintain cover, acceptable losses." But something in her broke. Not strategy, not protocol. Something human. She broke formation, pulled all 3 children from the target building at dawn, under full Taliban surveillance. Her cover shattered with the scream of a commander, "She's American." Then came the black bag. Then the cellar. They carved the coordinates into her back on the 5th day. Not as a message, but as punishment. They'd found them during a search written once on the sole of her boot in fading ink. That had been her contingency. So they made it permanent. Line by line, letter by letter. Not with a knife, with a soldering tool. She didn't scream. They added their own notes beneath. Insults, labels, the name of the commander who wanted her displayed. But she endured. Because she'd once been told that if she could make it 6 days, 6 full days, they'd find her. So she counted. In Dari, in Pashto, in blood. She crawled 57 meters across shale and silence. Broken ribs, dehydrated, one arm dislocated, left eye swollen shut. But she made it to the extraction point. The same one encoded in the scars. She wrote the final report using strips of her uniform, dipped in her own blood, wrapped around a cracked flashlight casing, troop positions, cache locations, false supply lines. It saved over 0 lives. It also never happened. Her file was closed with a single line. Mission concluded. Operative presumed Kia. They issued a coffin, played taps at an empty grave. Her name was stricken from 3 databases. Her family received a condolence letter she never read. She was offered 5 identities to choose from. She picked the one farthest from a battlefield. Elise Warren, aircraft maintenance, civilian status, no combat record. She took it not to escape the past, but to contain it. She never spoke of what happened, never asked for more. She simply rebuilt her life in a world where no one knew she'd once held back hell with a lie and a knife. She chose a wrench over a weapon, a hangar over a battlefield, silence over memory. Because no one asked her to. Because that was what made her dangerous. Now, 15 years later, the scars were still there. And General Granger, without knowing it, had peeled back the veil with a single insult. The numbers on her spine weren't just a curiosity. They were the signature of the forgotten. Lieutenant Mason Wright had made the call 20 minutes ago, to his father, Colonel Raymond Wright, retired intelligence. The moment he mentioned the words ghost protocol, the line had gone quiet. Then, "Where did you hear that name?" When Mason told him, The next sound was a chair falling. Then, "Get off the base, now. That woman doesn't exist. She saved our entire sector and then disappeared. You understand me? She does not exist." But Mason had already seen too much. And Elise? She'd seen it in his face. He knew. He recognized the scars not just as pain but as code. And with that recognition, the illusion broke. Elise didn't panic. She didn't run. She simply walked to the nearest sink, washed the grease from her hands, tied her coveralls around her waist again, revealing the coordinates in full daylight. The hangar didn't breathe. Granger stood frozen, mouth parting as if to speak. But Elise looked through him, past him, into the memory of a cell where silence had been survival. And she whispered so soft only the nearest could hear, "You want to know what service looks like, General?" She turned, the scars catching sunlight. "It looks like this." General Thomas Granger didn't move for a full 30 seconds. The scarred numbers burned behind his ice coordinates that meant nothing to civilians, but everything to men like him. Men who'd studied loss, planned around absence. Men whose careers were built on the silence of others. His voice, once booming and theatrical, now cracked like thin ice. "Where did you get those scars?" Elise didn't answer. She didn't need to. Granger stepped closer, slower now. No longer the predator, but a man circling the edge of something vast and terrible. "You were one of them." Still, she said nothing. Two thought the ghost protocol was a myth, a cautionary tale. Operatives erased to preserve missions. But they told us it was shut down, that no one made it out. At that, Elise finally looked at him. Her expression unreadable. Her voice flat. "Exactly. That's the point." Mason Wright returned then, phone still in hand, his face pale. He handed it silently to the general. On the screen, a declassified line from an old operation file. "Operative, Ghost, 5, status, terminated with honors. Location, Nuristan Province. Result, 40, 0 lives secured." Granger stared at the words, blinking hard. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You saved us." Elise turned away, walking back toward the aircraft. "You saved my brother," Granger continued. "He was stationed at Fob Red Rock. That was one of the primary targets." Elise checked a pressure valve. The hiss of hydraulics filled the silence between them. "I didn't do it for your brother." "Then why?" He stopped, rephrased. "Why didn't you come back? You could have been decorated, remembered, honored." She looked at him then, not with contempt, not with sorrow, but with an exhaustion that ran marrow deep. "Because honor is currency for the living," she said, "and I didn't come back alive." Granger flinched. "Elise Warren," she continued, "was built, constructed. She's not a veteran. She's not even a person. She's a solution, a silence designed to keep other people breathing." "I can change that," Granger said. "I can have your record restored. Public, Medal of Honor, full retirement. I'll call DC tonight." She laughed, unsee sharp, bitter sound. "And undo 15 years of cover? Burn every mission I've run since? Risk every life saved by the fact that no one remembers who I was? I owe you that much." "No, General, you owe me nothing." Her voice hardened. "You want to pay your debt? Don't give me medals. Don't give me headlines. Just make sure the next woman who walks into this hangar doesn't get asked if she's qualified because she's not wearing a uniform." Granger swallowed hard. "You didn't have to suffer like that. We should have brought you back. We should have." "You can't bring back ghosts," Elise interrupted. She stepped closer, quiet and cold. "I died in that valley. The rest is just motion." "But you're still serving, aren't you?" Granger asked, voice low. She didn't answer. Because the truth was obvious. He had humiliated her in front of the crew, torn into her like she was nothing, and she'd taken it not out of fear, but because reacting would have cost her the one thing she still had, her silence. Granger's guilt folded inward, his hands clenched. "Then what can I do?" She looked up at him, and for the first time, her eyes weren't distant. They were focused, sharp, alive. "You can protect the ones who don't get parades," she said. "You can see the ones like me before they have to bleed for your recognition." Then softer. "And you can leave me alone." Granger nodded slowly. It felt like the smallest, yet most sacred salute he'd ever given. He turned to leave. then paused. "You could still have it, you know," he said. "A place, a name, a story that ends in more than silence." Elise looked down at her hand scarred, stained with oil, steady. "This is the story," she said. "A jet that flies, a life saved, a girl who never has to know someone died for her to grow up free. You're a hero." "No," she whispered. "I'm a mechanic." Granger watched her for a long time. Then he did something no one expected. He saluted. Not dramatically, not performatively. Just once. Sharp. And when he turned, the junior officers behind him followed in silence. They left Hangar 3 without another word. That night, Granger sat in his quarters, staring at a half-written citation on his desk. The Medal of Honor, drafted but unsigned. Elise Warren's name in bold at the top. He tore it in half. Then in half again. He poured himself a drink, stared out the window toward the edge of base, where the hangars crouched under starlight like sleeping sentinels. He knew now what she meant. Some battles don't end with flags and anthems. Some warriors choose to vanish. Because their war never ends and neither does their watch. The next morning, Elise Warren was back in Hangar 3 before the sun had breached the ridgeline. No one spoke of what happened. Not out loud. But the silence around her had changed. It wasn't avoidance anymore. It was respectra, uneasy, unspoken. The younger mechanics still watched her work, but now with sharpened eyes, as if trying to see through layers they didn't know existed. Even Maria Gonzalez, seasoned and steel-spined, paused before speaking to Elise now, not out of fear but reverence. Elise didn't acknowledge the shift. She just kept working. A torque wrench in one hand, a checklist in the other. Fluid pressure, seal integrity, no part too small, no corner unexamined. What they didn't know, what none of them would ever know, is that she hadn't stopped serving. She'd only changed uniforms. Her station was no longer a forward operating base, but a hangar with peeling paint. Her tools no longer included encrypted radios and false passports, but people. Patterns. Airmen with hidden tells and old injuries they tried to hide. Officers who carried secrets in their gait. Contractors who asked the wrong questions at the wrong times. She watched them all. Not because she distrusted them, but because she understood how quickly one breach could cascade into tragedy. And more importantly, she understood how often those breaches looked like accidents. That's why she'd built her own system. Not a network, not an operation. A rhythm. The custodial staff who lingered too long at terminals weren't just bored, they were trained. The airfield medic who always showed up first, former field triage, knew how to spot chemical exposure in under 5 seconds. Even the quiet gate guard who asked too many casual questions, she reported directly to no one. Except Elise. None of them called her ma'am, none of them saluted. But when she passed, they moved, subtly, like they were part of something ancient and necessary. Because they were. She called them the shield. Never aloud, never in writing, just in the way she taught them to think, to notice. Check the pressure differential meant, watch that officer. Resonance in the stabilizers meant, something feels off, follow quietly. Hydraulic harmony meant, all clear, for now. And none of it showed up on any formal record, which is exactly how Elise preferred it. One afternoon, Airman First Class Rodriguez walked up to her in the hangar, sweat streaking down his temples. "Warren," he said, "that sensor placement trick you showed me last week. It flagged a microfracture in the F-22's hydraulic lock. We pulled the bird before test run. If that thing had gone up..." He didn't finish. Elise just nodded once. "Good catch. You saved a pilot's life." "No," she said, "you did." She didn't smile. But he did. And when he walked away, she noted how he carried himself, shoulders straighter, eyes sharper. Like a young man who had, for the first time, understood what he was part of. Later that week, a quiet commendation ceremony was held. Rodriguez received a citation, a handshake from command, his name in the newsletter. Elise watched from the far end of the hangar, behind a stack of equipment crates, invisible by choice. Mason Wright stood beside her. "You could have taken credit," he said quietly. "They would have given you a medal." "I don't want a medal," she replied. "I want planes that fly and pilots who come home." He nodded slowly. I used to think recognition was the finish line, he said. Elise tilted her head, eyes still on the podium. Recognition is a mirror. It only shows you what you're willing to see. Then what do you see when you look at them? She watched Rodriguez accept the citation, beaming, unaware of the sniper round that had never been fired, the flight failure that had never happened. I see someone I'll never have to save. Dawn came late in the high desert. The sun moved slow, heavy with heat to come, casting long shadows between the aircraft shells lining the tarmac. And in Hangar 3, as always, Elise Warren was already at work. A fresh F-35 sat before her, gleaming beneath the hangar lights. Its systems purred quietly perfectly. She moved around it like a conductor, every tool, an extension of muscle memory, every motion clean, precise, certain. Captain Reena Patel, one of the base's youngest pilots, wandered in holding a coffee she hadn't finished. She watched Elise for a moment, head tilted, brow furrowed. You're the one they talk about, aren't you? Elise didn't look up. They talk about a lot of people. No, Patel said, stepping closer. I mean the one with the numbers. The reason half the mechanics check seals twice now. The one who knew about the sabotage before the inspectors. Silence. Then Elise spoke, soft and measured. Lots of ghosts on military bases, Captain. Most just don't leave footprints. Patel hesitated. My father flew helicopters. Afghanistan. Said a woman saved his squadron. Crawled through hell with intel written in blood. He used to say she wasn't a soldier, she was a promise. Elise paused her work, one hand resting on the fuselage. She didn't turn around. Your father flew out of FOB Red Rock? Yes. A beat. Then he made it home. Patel nodded. Because of someone who never did. This time, Elise looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes, clear and impossibly steady, held something that wasn't pride or pain. Just truth. You want to thank her? Elise asked. Patel blinked. Yes. Then fly well and come back. Patel swallowed, nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Outside, another aircraft screamed into the morning sky. Inside, Elise bent back to her task. The hum of systems, the rattle of tools, the mechanical heartbeat of preparation. And all around her, echoes of what had never happened. No explosion in Hangar 2, no catastrophic failure on the F-16's final test run, no funeral for Airman Rodriguez. Victories without banners. Safety built on silence. There was no statue of Elise Warren, no plaque, no formal record of ghost protocol, or the woman who once carried a mission on her skin. But those who knew. The janitor who lingered a few seconds longer at the intel terminals, the gate guard who asked just enough questions, the mechanic who felt vibration instead of waiting for a red light, the pilot who checked her stabilizer one more time because the woman with the torque wrench had once looked at her for a second too long. They knew, and they passed it on. Not through speeches, but through standards. Through how they showed up, through how they saw. Elise moved with the rhythm of habit. Check valve, reset torque, seal line, sign off. She didn't need applause. She needed hydraulics that held under pressure, engines that didn't fail, young lives that never had to learn how much blood it took to buy silence. Her war hadn't ended. It had simply changed terrain. And her legacy would not be carved in stone but in flight logs, safe landings, and warriors who never had to become ghosts. Because she already was. Elise Warren never needed medals. She didn't ask for recognition. She chose to be invisible so others could come home whole. And that may be the greatest lesson this story leaves behind. Not every sacrifice wants to be seen, but every sacrifice deserves to be remembered. In a world that often measures value by titles, noise, and accolades, people like Elise remind us that quiet is also strength. That you don't have to be in the spotlight to hold everything together. That service, in its purest form, is often silent. Maybe someone like Elise works beside you, lives down the street, fixes the things no one thanks them for. And maybe their quiet is holding the weight of 100 things you'll never see. If this story moved you even just a little, subscribe to the channel, because these are the stories that matter. Not the loud ones, the true ones. And drop a comment below. Do you believe silent sacrifice is a form of heroism? We want to hear your thoughts. Because sometimes, The most powerful battles are the ones no one ever knows happened.